Thank you for joining us for the Orange County Arts Council's virtual studio visit. This program is made possible by donations from people like you. 50% of donations go directly to the artists featured, and 50% to Orange County Arts Council programs. Please consider donating today. You can donate by going to ocartscouncil.org. The Arts Council's virtual studio visits are presented in partnership with the Newburgh Free Library and are made possible in part by NYSCA, the New York State Council on the Arts.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah McKay, Executive Director of Orange County Arts Council. What better way can we think of to spend this evening that is cold, rainy, and gray than exploring local artists together? I'm thrilled that we will be learning more about artist Tamara Rafkin tonight. Before I introduce our facilitator for the program this evening, I'd like to remind all of you that next month's studio visit will be with Joan Bankemper out of Warwick, New York on April 15th. So please make sure to register in advance so we can see you all again next month. I'd like to introduce Cody Rounds, who will be facilitating this studio visit this evening. Thank you all again.
Hi everyone, I'm Cody Rounds, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Tamara Rafkin tonight. You know, we're lucky to be able to expand our reach by offering these virtual tours, and one thing about that that's really nice is we have people coming from all over the place. So why don't you guys go ahead and use the chat during the interview and tell us where you're from. Tamara Rafkin is a multidisciplinary American and Belgian artist. She has extensive backgrounds in both photography and ceramics, and often uses these mediums to create experiential pieces and installations. Her work centers around how people, cultures, emotions, and place are intertwined, and plays a lot with the idea of transformation. Tamara, why don't you go ahead and tell us about the work you want to show us today and a little bit about your process.
Hi, welcome to my studio. I am going to be giving you a brief overview of a lot of work from the last 20 years that kind of all influence each other. It's been a journey. And then we're going to do a short walk around in my studio, which is not huge, but very useful. And I'm open to questions. And I think this will be better as a dialogue if you guys ask questions as I go along. So with that, I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of my work. So this is my No Adults Allowed series. This body of work began in early 2000 and then went into 9/11. And my work at the time was very focused on the way spaces feel and the energies that they hold in them. This work is about the metaphor of New York City losing its innocence and the fear and uncertainty that was hiding in the shadows, the way that we all felt at the time in Manhattan. I saw this as a great metaphor for childhood and fear and worry that is correlated in the signs that are on the playgrounds in New York City about letting children be safe, but being aware and being afraid of the harm that can come to them, and what lurks in the shadows is kind of a way that we were all feeling after 9/11. I worked on this series until 2004, at which point I then in 2005 moved to Belgium. And I continued working on the ideas of the way spaces hold emotion and the way people's emotions and cultures show those emotions in their spaces. There's the sister series here called Watchful Houses, which are the ones here that are open, and the sleeping houses, which are here. The sleeping houses are in Belgium and the watchful houses are in the Netherlands. These two areas, it's the Dutch side of the Belgium that I'm speaking about, Flanders. These two countries share a language. They both speak Netherlands, or Dutch as we call it here in the States. And it's very interesting because the two cultures have a very different reaction to the way that they deal with their houses at night. The Dutch leave everything wide open so that you can see into them. And the Flemish close everything up, even though that they're in these houses that look like they're waiting and abandoned for somebody to come along. So I explored these two bodies of work from about 2006 to about 2014, shooting in my own village in Belgium where I was living, and through a residency that I did in the Netherlands, somewhat near the Rhine River in the west of the east of the Netherlands. And at the same time I was shooting that work, I started studying ceramics in Belgium and was fascinated with the history of my own family. My grandmother collected worry beads. And so I started dealing with these ideas of emotion by asking people to write down their worries that I then put inside of worry beads that were made as portraits of each of the people who was writing the worries down for me. The worries are in their original languages, their mother tongues. And there are 19 to 21 worries on each strand of beads. So that's how that's 19 to 21 worries because there's 19 to 21 beads on a strand of beads. So the worry beads are 19 to 21 beads on a strand. Each of these beads has a written worry by the person who I then photograph when the beads are done in their hands. The beads are all done as a portrait of each of the people. And this screen here, this image is kind of a mock-up of what I'm going to be doing with the scanned words of the text that I scan before they get put into the beads. Because I'm hoping to project these in a gallery space across the beads and the photographs when this whole project is done. This is a very long-term project. I've been working on it about 10 years and it's not finished because the people involved are all over the globe and it takes a while to get to them to do the photographs. And I think I've completed about 13 people out of the 20 to 21 people I want to be part of this.
Tamara, was there any specific way you selected these people?
It initially just started with people I knew because that was the easiest way to get going. Now I think the end of the people are probably going to be, I'm actually trying to search out some people for some specific languages because I want it to be very global. At the moment, I've got French and Spanish and English. I'm probably Dutch. I have somebody who's agreed to do them that writes in Farsi, which I'm really looking forward to because I really want Arabic included in these. I'm really trying to find someone who writes either in Chinese or Japanese or both, you know. I want it to be very global because it's all about how everybody worries. It crosses cultures and it crosses, you know, races, and it's about all of us. But it's just a long-term project, especially because, oh, and I've got it in Polish, but the person who wrote it in Polish is in Israel. So I've got to get to Israel to do the picture.
This is great. I mean, what I'm hearing is it's global and universal in the way that, you know, it's just really distilling the human experience down across cultures, across globe.
Well, I'm very fascinated with emotion and cultures and emotions that cross cultures and emotions and the way that they're depicted that are very specific to cultures. Because I think emotion is, you know, it crosses languages and then it doesn't cross languages because some languages have terms for emotions that other languages don't, which actually really challenges and changes the way you think of that emotion. And then at the end of my time living in Belgium, I was very lucky. I got offered what I call a self-directed residency. Some benefactors of mine offered me their apartment in Berlin for 2 months to go make work. And I went to Berlin and did this series, which is called Scars, which again is about emotion and how cultures deal with things. All of these images are shrapnel wounds and shrapnel repairs on the buildings across Berlin from World War II and the East-West divide. And they leave them so that people remember what happened, so that the culture discusses it and processes it and gets through it instead of covering it up and forgetting about it. And at the time, I had gone through a very serious breakup in my life, and this work was actually me also processing through that. So it correlated as well with emotional scars. The work itself is very much about the beauty that one finds after trauma, even though the trauma remains, if you can process it and get to the other side of it. And I have some examples of this work so that you can actually see what they look like on paper in the studio.
So these are photographs.
These are photographs, yeah. So this past year, I created this work called Dust to Dust. I'm gonna let the video run and then I'll talk more about it. Dust to Dust is about giving collective space for mourning and grief. Before the pandemic hit, I had been working on this piece. It came out of a book I was reading called Darien Leaders, A New Black, which is about how Western culture has gotten rid of a space and time for mourning and grief. And while I was reading that book, the idea for this project came to me, which is, again, along the lines of the Worry Beads project. It's a transformation, what I call a transformational project. So I created, the idea is that people come and they write on these clay unfired what I call ex votos, like the ex votos that you find in Catholic churches for prayers. And I have a couple of them here. So they're these little clay, round seemed the easiest form to work, and they're unfired, and people write on the back, like the writing with the beads. They write what they're mourning or who they're mourning, what they're grieving, and then they give me the tiles. And what you saw in the video was me pounding the tiles into dust. And then that circle that you saw in the video, that dust is the dust from everyone's mourning ex votos. So the dust is collected and added to the circle. I did this piece during Newburgh Open Studios for 2 days, and I walked the circle for 6 hours each day barefoot. While I was doing this, only stopping occasionally for breaks, but to pound more of these tiles into dust. I think I covered the circle 6 times with people's dust over that 2-period day. So yeah,
So this piece is, just to clarify, it's not the video, but it is an interactive piece, and the video was for documentation.
The video was for documentation.
Everyone, everyone understands that. Now, you had mentioned that you had started this before the pandemic, and in this video, it's very clear that you're wearing a mask. And I mean, there's no way around that your piece is now having this much, much larger conversation. How did you feel about that?
It was, this piece has been a very interesting transformation process for myself. It's the first time I've ever done something that is a performance work, even though when I was a child, I did a lot of theater, but that's not the same. And so I was working on this. I was drawing the sketches out for the mortar, for the pestle. I did a lot of research. I grew up down south and was really familiar with these mortars and pestles from the area I grew up in. And I had a very clear vision of how I wanted it to look. So I reached out to another Newburgh artist, Hannah, to sculpt it for me. So she created it for me from my drawings. And then I reached out to some friends of mine, her sound artists, to create the soundtrack that you heard with that video. So that audio track plays through the whole performance. It's 29 minutes long. It was made for the piece and it's on a continual loop. And we worked collectively on that, with me giving them like almost poetics for them to build the soundscape around, talking about how I want it to feel anxious in places and then build to plateaus and having moments of transcendence, and pretty much the process of the emotional process of grief is translated into the soundscape. And I was really nervous. I was nervous about how much, for as much of a serious topic as this is in the first place, it became much more serious while I was working on it. And I actually wound up doing a workshop with somebody myself to kind of like get past my own fear about bringing this to people and about how to hold the space for other people, because I was creating this space for grief, but I'm the portal for doing it for them. So I had to be able to be grounded, which is actually why I walked barefoot, so that I could keep in touch with the ground while I was doing it. I hadn't planned on walking. That kind of happened when I got in the space. I hadn't actually planned what I was doing in between pounding the tablets into dust. And while I was there, I realized I needed to walk the circle, which directly correlates to the Scar series, because that body of work was me processing my own grief. And I spent 6 days a week walking 6 hours a day across Berlin while I was shooting it for 6 weeks, I think.
Wow. What were some of the reactions of the participants in this installation?
It was a mixture. I had some people who came and just watched and didn't want to be involved. I had people, I didn't read any of them. I read one, at which point I realized I had to not read them because I was connecting too much emotionally with the pandemic and everything to what I was reading. Because the 8-year-old child came up with his family and wrote, "I miss my friends," and it nearly wrecked me. So I just stopped reading them. I took them and I didn't look at them, and I put them in the mortar and pestle where I couldn't see the writing because I couldn't connect there. I had some people who stayed a very long time after I crushed their pieces that needed to stay with it, which is exactly what this space was for. I've had several people react afterwards and tell me how important it was for them. I had one person reach out to me on Facebook to explain to me that they had gone through a very personal tragedy 6 weeks before this, and it was the first time they had had an opportunity to honor what they had lost. So yeah, it did what I wanted it to do, and I wanted this was kind of a test run. I want to do this in other places. I want to bring this piece to other places.
Is there anything lined up anywhere that people can interact with?
I'm open. I'm submitting it a couple of places. You know, I'd like it to be in multiple community types of spaces. This isn't just about the art community. This is about all communities. I mean, I'm very open to this being in art spaces. I'm very open to doing this in faith spaces. I'm very open to doing this in communal public spaces, you know. Obviously it has to adapt a little bit depending on the size restrictions and the space, and but that's how things work.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So everyone, Tamara is American, Belgian. She's from the South. She's here up in the North. And photography, ceramics, all of these almost opposing sides to you, but you weave them together so beautifully. So why don't you give us a little tour around your studio so we can see a little bit of how that's done.
Okay.
So as a photographer, I pretty much got my house in Newburgh because of the room I'm in, which is my studio room. The light in here normally is amazing. It's a little hard to tell today because of the weather outside. But as a photographer these days, most of the time is spent on the computer. And in this zone here of my room. So scanner, which is covered for dust, printer, my old analog universe is here with all of my negatives. I do still shoot analog and I shoot color. So negatives are stored here. They get scanned. I do still print, but doing color printing, you have to do that where there is the mechanical parts of it, the lab and the dark room. So that is a color rental dark room.
Oh, just
in Belgium, I mean in Manhattan, and then I'm here, and what I usually do is I've got these metal panels on my walls where I put work up that I'm working on. This is digital work that I'm working on right now for an exhibition coming up with a photo group here in the Hudson Valley that I'm part of, and we're going to be showing at Mount St. Mary's next month. And then come over here. This is usually for my larger color work for spot toning. For those of you who don't work analog, when you're working analog, you get dust in your pictures and you actually have to go in with color dyes and spot tone. So these are a couple of the examples of the work from the Worry Beads series, from the Worry series, the prints. These are some of the beads, because I wanted to show you the beads. But so yeah, this is kind of a smaller size than I normally print. When I'm printing my color work, I tend to work pretty large. The houses I showed you are 30 inches square. These are 18 inches square on 20 by 24 paper. To give you an idea of the scale, most of my work is printed out. This is getting ready to go to a collector. And so this is one of my photographs that I printed. And this one's 30 by 30 framed. It comes out at about 36 by 36. My studio is not huge. And like you said, I work on a lot of things that are opposing each other. So the ceramics I can't do in this space, because dust and photography are not friends with each other. I have a very, you know, yin yang life of dust and no dust. But I do work on the sketches for my ceramic work here. I work on storing some of my ceramic work here. So like these are part of a commission that I have a video to show you in a little bit of that I've been working on through the pandemic. And these are the template pieces. And on that board over there are the layout sketches that I submitted to the client, to the collector who's commissioned the work. So these are the initial sketches that I did for them for this piece, which is 14 feet wide by 7 feet high for their house. And it's 25 sections. If you've been following me on Instagram, I've been talking about it through the pandemic as I've been working on it. And then my studio, which has these lovely vintage glass old doors that I brought in to bring the light through my house, because this room really is amazing when it's sunny. Also has these beautiful shelves that I keep my smaller ceramics works on to show people. Which these works are inspired a lot by the Hudson Valley. These waveforms that I've been doing, most of my ceramic work is about water, which is kind of funny. They're kind of diametrically opposed to each other. But these are called River and Fog, based off of this area right around here, around Newburgh and Beacon, and the way Mount Beacon and the fog and the river react to each other and the colors that are involved. So it's not a huge studio, but it's a lovely studio. But like I said, I work in multiple places. So this is kind of the hub of what I do. And then there's the color rental darkroom that I print my analog photography at in Manhattan. They also do my larger digital prints. And then there's the ceramic studio that I work at here, which is the Newburgh pottery at Atlas.
Tell us a little bit about how you ended up in Newburgh. What brought you here? Where were you before?
I have a very complicated family story. And I initially came to the area because my family situation changed when I was a teenager, and I went from growing up and living in Charleston, South Carolina, to being sent to New York. And my family has property in the area, not in Newburgh specifically, but about 20 minutes west of here. And then at the time, my grandmother, who's no longer alive, she had a house in New Windsor. So since I was 16, I've been in and out of the area, and I've always been in love with Newburgh. Growing up in Charleston, I am a sucker for historical towns and old architecture and water cities. So, and I'm madly in love with the Hudson Valley, always have been. So there's that, but I went to college down south, and I stayed in Atlanta where I went to college, and then I tried out San Francisco for a while, and then I went to New York City for a while, and then fell in love with somebody who took me off to Europe and to Belgium, which includes that part of my life. And then when things changed there, my parents are getting older and my family is here, and I decided it was time just to spend some time with them, and I wound up coming back here. And before I even left Belgium for the States, I was on a plan to get to Newburgh.
Well, happy to have you. So did you start with photography or ceramics? How did those two fit together?
I started with photography and with mixed media. I've got a bachelor's of fine arts with a major in photography and a minor in mixed media. And I did printmaking and painting and drawing at the Atlanta College of Art with some amazing professors and amazing classmates. I always wanted to do ceramics and sculpture, but there were priorities to my schedule due to my major and my minor, which didn't allow that to happen. And then I spent my life pretty much dividing up my time between my commercial photography work and my fine art photography work, because alongside of all of this, I've spent a good part of my life being an entertainment photographer, doing stuff for music magazines and record labels and record companies. And in my 20s, that was the bigger part of my life, and the art part was the smaller part of my life. Sometimes they flip-flop. 9/11 actually was a flip-flop. The music took a backdrop and my artwork started selling like crazy, so that artwork became a focus. And it was that way for a long time. And then in Belgium, I wound up back in the music world, working for the Flemish radio and television network, photographing entertainment for them and writers and all kinds of things for the online news stream, and kind of doing both. But so I wanted to do ceramics and it just never fit in. I was doing too many other things. And on top of that, it was doing ceramics in the States generally is a very expensive endeavor to do, to get a degree in ceramics. So it didn't fit into my plan. And then when I got to Belgium, I was able to get training there. I basically wound up getting a ceramics degree in Belgium. So I did my ceramics degree over a 6-year part-time program in Belgium. I did it all in Flemish. I did it all in Dutch. Yeah, I'm very happy. I love it. It's been very interesting as I've done more ceramics. Photography has also become more digital. So in a lot of ways, you know, when I initially started doing fine art photography, it was very, very much a darkroom process and very analog and hands-on. And now it's mostly a computer process after the fact, after you're shooting. And I love what ceramics gives me. It gives me a space that's away from the computer on top of a different method of working. I realized that there were things I could do in ceramics that I had been trying to draw my whole life that I could actually make out of clay and make look like the way they were in my head, which wasn't working on paper 2-dimensionally.
What are some of those things?
Mainly water.
Which is very interesting I can't imagine how difficult it is to represent water from an earthen material, but you do so really well.
Thank you. I'm trying. I posted about this on my Instagram the other day. So initially the ceramics became about water because I was overwhelmed by the images of the tsunami in Japan 10 years ago. And initially I made a bunch of what were bowls, pretty much bowls, with these waves splashing through them very violently. That was really about the tsunami, about this kind of power that I saw in the video footage of the waves coming through the streets, which, you know, ties into my ideas of architecture and space. You know, it was very, very interesting seeing something I love so much, which is water, just the way it was taking over the city.
That's a goal.
So I started there and it just kind of kept going. While I was in the Netherlands working on the watchful houses, I was able to, because I was shooting at night, I was able to kind of roam around a lot during the day. And I was very close to the Rhine River. And I was working on a ceramics project that I was trying to figure out. And it was actually sitting and watching the ripples on the river that inspired me to really take the ceramics further into creating these rippling ceramic forms that I'm now, you know, I've made a large piece of that work, which was based off of the river where I grew up in Charleston. And now this piece I'm doing for this collector is based off of the Pacific Ocean in Northern California.
Do you by any chance have a photograph of the Charleston piece?
I have it on my website. If you go to my website, sorry, everybody, if you go to my website, it's in the ceramics area. It's called On the Cooper, Down on the Cooper, which is
Maybe
the river.
Show everyone towards the end.
Well, I mean, you'll get an idea of what I'm doing in the piece that I'm going to show, because I've got the video, the next video Sarah's going to show for you guys is a video of the piece, the commission piece I've been working on. So this piece, so these collectors who are also friends, they came to me after seeing the river piece I've been talking about and said, we really want to commission a work like that, but for our own home. And in a different color palette, something based more on what we've got, and they're in Northern California. So I put together this work. It's for 14 feet wide, up to 7 feet high, and it's these 25 sections. And so I start with these basically flat, strips of clay, and then twist them and build them up upon each other to build these waves, these ripples. This piece itself is going to be that the bottom, which is 14 feet across, but starts at 6 feet high on their walls, so it's just above eye level, is the waves crashing on the rocks around the coastline in the Morro Bay kind of area. And then they get calmer as it goes up, and the pieces at the top are going to be the horizon line of the ocean. So the pieces at the bottom are higher relief and the pieces at the top are lower relief. I just put them all into the first firing. I'm getting ready to glaze them all soon, and then they'll be fired again. And I'm posting the journey along on Instagram as I'm doing it. So you guys will see it when I see it. I'm not quite sure exactly what it's going to be like. Other than I have it in my mind's eye, but when you're working with glaze chemistry, there's always subtle changes that you're not always expecting. So you just go with the organics of it.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm seeing a question in the chat that is similar to one I actually have. The question is, assuming that you are multilingual, how does that inform your work? And what languages do you think in when you're working?
It's a good question. It definitely informs my work, and sometimes the titles now are in Dutch because they mean more of what I'm trying to say than the English does. I think to myself, I definitely, when I'm working in ceramics, think in Dutch more, but that's also because I learned it in Dutch and Flemish. It has a lot to do with who have I been talking to that day too. The interesting thing about Belgium and becoming Belgian, because I became Belgian, it's, I'm a naturalized Belgian. And it was definitely a process that I went through, is that I spent a lot of time, I didn't live in Brussels, but I spent a lot of time in Brussels for a lot of reasons. And Brussels has its own way of speaking, where you'll be at a dinner party and one person's talking in one language and the next person's answering them, but in their own language. And the third person answers both of them in their own language, and everybody understands each other and flips back and forth. And people flip back and forth in the middle of sentences. And that drove me crazy when I first moved there. And now I think like that.
I'm seeing your ceramic waves, but as people in a conversation.
Totally.
Yeah. So what artists have influenced you, if any?
Lots of artists have influenced me in different ways, and it all depends on where I'm at what time. Writers influence me a lot. Music influences me a lot. When I was first starting out, I definitely think I was my sensibilities definitely have something to do with William Eggleston at times because of his color, and I was madly in love with Barbara S. and the emotion that I think her photographs had. I was really sad that she passed away a few weeks ago. I was a huge fan of George Platt Lyons, and I always will be. My tastes are all over the place. I am a big fan of painters and other artists. I'm a huge fan of Ansel Kiefer's. And I'm horrible with names. I could probably tell you pieces and describe them in perfect detail and not always remember exactly the name of the artist who made them.
You have talked a little bit about having your art and also your commercial work, both at times being photography, which is so nice. Did either inform the other? I know you were mostly photographing musicians.
If you look at the two bodies of work, I think my color sense translates. in my 20s, I was going nonstop. I was out shooting like 6 nights a week. And so I think initially my fine art became about the spaces people were in without them, because I was seeking refuge away from all the people I was dealing with work-wise. I think because I do music photography, and as I've gotten older, that's turned really into a spotlight on jazz photography. I think that the sensibilities of the music and the way that moves, and I definitely think that the sensibility of stage lighting has had an influence on me. There's definitely crossovers, even though one is all about people and one is all about people but doesn't have any people in them.
I think of it as you're really dealing with people in a holistic sense. You know, one is the physical and one is the experience of human.
Yeah, I'm definitely right now, everything I've been reading, everything I've been talking about, and anybody who might be in this room who is in any of the various conversations I've had anywhere, especially in the last year, I'm big on the concept that we're moving away from duality and into a realm of interconnectivity and multi levels and, you know, personas and all that sort of stuff. It definitely reflects, I think, in the way I deal with things. It's that, you know, everything is connected. So
one question I'm seeing in the chat is, what do you think is the single most driving factor, if there is one, behind your creative powers? Do you have one stream throughout all of your works? Drive?
I don't know. Do I?
I can tell you what I see, but I want to hear what you see.
I'm someone who had an upbringing that made me very sensitive to other people and to environments, and I think that's probably the thread. I know that I have to make work. I know I'm one of those people that you don't want to be around me if I'm not creating. So I've never quite questioned it. I just do it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Guys, we are running a little out of time soon. So if you have questions, go ahead and write them in the chat and we're going to open up the floor to those questions. So let me see what I see. Is your musical taste also eclectic? How is your musical taste?
Oh, all over the place. I was actually trained as a classical flautist as a child, and my dad was a jazz musician, jazz percussionist, and I have lots of good friends that in all kinds of music worlds. I actually had to judge for a music festival once. I was one of the people asked to judge the submission tapes for bands that were playing. This was back when I was doing so much music photography, and they used the music industry friends who asked me to do it used to laugh because they were like, "You are picking things that none of us would pick." And I'm like, well, just because I don't necessarily like that music doesn't mean that that band wasn't good at what they're doing. So I can get into a song if I like the song. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a genre. So
it's that empathy. What does success look like for you? How do you measure that? What are your goals?
Success is a variable moving point. It has changed in my life and it keeps changing. Ultimately, success is being able to just work on the work I want to work on, which even with the stress and strains of life, I've been managing to do that more and more. So I'm feeling very lucky. I had a portfolio review about 8 years ago where I kept explaining to the gallerist who was looking at my work, and this was at a photo festival or something. that I wasn't as young as everybody else standing in line for them. And I was like, I kept apologizing because I'm like, I know I'm emerging, but I'm not like a 20 something emerging artist. This is, you know, that emerging term. And they said to me, she was like, look, I'm already taking you 10 times more seriously than half of the people in this line because you're 40 and you're still doing it. So that kind of changed my perception on things a lot. The fact is that, yeah, I'm still doing it and people are seeing the work and they're connecting with the work and people want to take their work to their homes. And, you know, when I was in my 20s, the success is that I was on magazine covers and I was, you know, written up in the local newspaper and all that sort of stuff. The success now is that I'm making work that I'm proud of and that people are responding to it, and that overall I'm managing to get by on my artwork. That's success. I'm still competitive as hell, I'll admit that, but which sometimes does me in my own head, but other than that, yeah.
So how do you manage your time? Is it all creative practice right now? What does that look like?
At the moment, I straight up for anybody listening, I'm never been able to just have a creative practice. I've always been working as well. Sometimes that work is creative work. Sometimes that work is photography that's for a company or headshots or whatever it is, the commercial photography that pays the bills. Sometimes that's arts administration work. I've had many years where I've been doing arts admin. Right now, I'm working part-time doing arts admin. And the rest of the time right now, I've been working partially because of this ceramic commission I'm working on, which has allowed the balance to be more heavy on the art side and less heavy on the admin side.
Excellent, thank you. I love asking artists about what other jobs they may have, because I feel like we've all had a good handful of really surprising employments and opportunities. And have you had any jobs that weren't directly creative related?
Not in a long time. I mean, the last couple of years, I had a job that was an actual serious job, and I making jokes because I think it's the first time ever I actually had a work contract and a salary and a 401k. But the company I was working for was still arts related. So I still count that as being arts related.
That's excellent. We have one viewer asking, what is the title of the book you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your work on grief?
It is by Darian Leader, who's a British psychiatrist or psychologist. I'm going to get the two mixed up, forgive me. And it's called The New Black. I know there's like a subtitle to that, but I know if you look up Darian Leader, The New Black, you'll find it.
So do you have anything coming up that we can visit? I know with COVID, it's a little strange, but any opportunities that you want to talk about, anything we can see, participate in?
I'm very excited. Chris Nyan is on this call at CMA Gallery that he runs at Mount St. Mary's. I'm part of a group exhibition of this photography group, The Fix, that I'm part of. We're having our first group exhibition. And that is next month. We're going to be doing some virtual opening stuff. And then hopefully when the rules change, we'll be able to have some people there in person. The other thing I'm doing at this moment that I'm very proud of, but it hasn't been kind of really super announced to the world because I'm waiting on them to do that. And I know that there's some people from there also on this call, is that I was one of 10 Belgian artists invited to show my work at the residence of the Belgian Consulate General, the ambassador to the US in New York, at the residency in New York. I'm the only naturalized Belgian, I believe, that they've invited. So I'm super honored to be part of that. And they've got porcelain ceramic works on view. As soon as they get done with everything they're doing a catalog, and that's an embassy space, so that's by invitation only. But I'm I'm really honored to be part of that.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. So we have 5 minutes left. Is there any advice that you want to give people who are pursuing their career?
Keep working. You're gonna get discouraged. Just keep going. Find ways to keep going, and give yourself. I think the biggest thing for me is that, and I'm hoping the art world is getting away from this. I mean, we talked about, yeah, I started out as a photographer, and I always battled between, am I a commercial photographer, am I a fine art photographer? People want you to categorize yourself, and then what kind of photographer are you, and exactly what do you do? And I've never been just a photographer, because even all those years I was doing, mixed media work. I was doing some collage work. I was doing like photo transfers that I was painting on top of. Classification. We all get hung up on classification. I think the biggest advice I could give anybody is not to get hung up on classification. So.
Yeah, that's great. Just view water. There are threads here, Tamara. That's really excellent. So really quick before we're done, tell us a little bit about the Newburgh now that you're in.
Well, I'm very excited to be part of this amazing group of people that are here in Newburgh. And I'm really hoping that all of the varying cultures around here, there's a lot of different arts communities and these different cultures all living on top of each other in Newburgh. I'd love to see us all like intermingling a bit more. It's very exciting what's going on here. Unfortunately, it's been a little weird with the pandemic, because I think a big part of especially art community is seeing people in person. And so I think there's been a little bit of a, I don't know, not a lull, but I don't know. I've found during the pandemic, I'm connecting more to my friends globally than I am to my friends down the street. Probably because I was already used to talking to them in this virtual space. But I'm getting excited that it's getting warmer again. I was really impressed with how we all came together during Open Studios last year, even with COVID protocols, and how we managed to have a very successful Open Studios in spite of it. I think what's going on here at all the different spaces is amazing. We keep getting more galleries, which is great. And I just feel like there's a lot of good energy going on in the arts community around here. So I'd love to see us just see how we can reach out to the rest of the community here and keep building bridges and building up stronger. I'm just a big community fan.
You can see that in your work. Definitely. It's really, really beautiful. I mean, bringing people together, having your own experience, honoring that, and then sharing that through your work for others as well.
Thank you, Cody.
Really very powerful. Well, one final question. Do you have a next big project coming up that you can give us a tweak on?
I've got lots of things in my sketchbook. Right now, the biggest thing is I'm trying to get this Dust to Dust piece out to other places. I guess the biggest thing I've got coming up is that the commission I'm creating, it's sculptural, it's ceramic, it's got to get to California. So I'm getting ready when it's done. Because of COVID, art shipping has become a much more expensive endeavor than it was when this was first being planned. So I'm putting it in my car and I'm driving cross country with it to go install it. And so the plan for that is that installation excursion is going to become a photography excursion. And I'm not quite sure what's going to come of it, but it's me and my camera driving to California and back. So we'll see. I haven't, I was in Europe from 2005 to 2015. And I've been back since the summer of 2015, and I've only left New York once by car to go to DC, and I've gone once by plane to LA. So I haven't seen America itself in a very long time. So we'll see what comes of this.
Well, we can't wait to see it through your eyes.
So thanks everybody for showing up today.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I'm going to ask everyone at this point to unmute yourself and give Tamara a big round of applause, and Cody Rounds, thank you for facilitating and thank you for letting us into your space. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I am really, really thrilled that I was able to visit your space physically for Open Studios, and I'm hoping for this coming year that we might be able to physically visit again.
We'll see.
We'll see. Yes, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And Tamara does have some work on our online gallery currently at OCS.
Yes, it's actually these 3 pieces.
Amazing. Actually, as everybody's trickling out, I have a little slideshow of the members exhibit I'm going to play because we're hosting a closing reception on Facebook Live next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we invite the artists who participate to give us their reflections of the past year as it relates to their work. So that's going to be really fun. So thanks again, Tamara, and thank you, everyone, and thank you, Cody.